The sun was setting over the barren landscape of the alien planet. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and the distant echo of explosions. The human military had been fighting against the alien forces for months, but the war seemed endless. The soldiers were tired, their morale low. Among them was John, a battle-hardened soldier who had seen more than his fair share of death and destruction. Yet, despite the horrors of war, he never lost his sense of duty. His mission was always clear: protect humanity, no matter the cost. John's squad had been assigned to patrol a section of the colony that had recently come under attack. The mission seemed straightforward: sweep the area, clear out any alien remnants, and report back. But nothing was ever straightforward in a war. The squad moved through the ruins, their footsteps echoing in the quiet. Buildings that had once been homes now lay in ruins, their skeletal remains casting long shadows across the ground. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of static from the soldiers' radios. John was in the lead, scanning the area for any signs of movement. He could feel the tension in the air, a sense of unease that had settled over the squad since they entered the colony. The wind howled through the broken streets, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt metal. He tightened his grip on his rifle, ready for anything. "Move up," he ordered, his voice steady but firm. The squad advanced cautiously, their eyes constantly darting around, searching for any sign of the enemy. They were in hostile territory, and there was no telling when or where the next attack would come from. As they turned a corner, the ground suddenly shook beneath their feet. A massive explosion rocked the air, sending debris flying in all directions. The soldiers ducked for cover, instinctively taking shelter behind the remains of a building. John's heart pounded in his chest as he peered over the rubble, scanning the horizon for any signs of the enemy. "Contact!" someone shouted. The squad sprang into action, returning fire as alien soldiers appeared in the distance, their dark figures silhouetted against the smoke-filled sky. John cursed under his breath. They were outnumbered, but they had no choice but to fight. He aimed his rifle at the approaching aliens, squeezing the trigger. The sound of gunfire filled the air, mingling with the explosions and the cries of battle. But then something caught John's eye, a figure moving among the debris. It was a girl no older than 12 or 13, her blonde hair disheveled and her clothes torn. She was running, stumbling over the rubble, unaware of the danger that surrounded her. Her wide, frightened eyes darted around, searching for a way out. "Get down," John shouted, but the girl didn't hear him. In an instant, the alien forces turned their attention to her, their weapons raised. John's instincts kicked in. He had to save her. Without thinking, he sprinted toward her, his boots pounding against the ground. "Hey," he shouted, reaching out for her. "Get down!" The girl froze, her eyes wide with terror as she looked up at him. Before she could react, a burst of alien gunfire sent a shower of debris flying toward them. John tackled the girl to the ground, shielding her with his body. The world exploded around them as the firefight continued. "Stay down," John ordered, his voice harsh. He could feel the weight of the girl's small body beneath him, her chest rising and falling with each frantic breath. He had no idea who she was or why she was here, but that didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping her safe. With a quick glance, John saw that his squad was engaged in a fierce battle with the aliens. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but they were holding their ground. "For now, we need to get out of here," John muttered, scanning the area for an escape route. But the battlefield was chaotic and every direction seemed dangerous. He grabbed the girl by the arm and pulled her to her feet. "Can you run?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. The girl nodded, her face pale with fear. She was trembling, but she was alive. "Good, stay close to me," John ordered. He pulled her behind him as they dashed through the ruins, weaving in and out of the debris. The sounds of gunfire and explosions grew louder, but they kept moving, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. As they rounded a corner, John spotted a narrow alleyway that seemed to lead to a safer area. Without hesitation, he pulled the girl toward it. The alley was dark and the air smelled of burning plastic and metal. John didn't slow down. They had to keep moving. "Stay low," he instructed, crouching down as they moved deeper into the alley. The girl mirrored his movements, her eyes darting around, constantly on the lookout for danger. They moved quickly, their breath coming in short gasps. John could hear the sounds of the battle behind them, but he didn't dare look back. They were still too close to the fighting. He had to get them to safety. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, abandoned structure. John pushed open the door and ushered the girl inside. The building was empty, the walls covered in soot and ash. It seemed like the perfect place to hide for a moment, at least until the fighting died down. John closed the door behind them and leaned against it, his breath heavy and labored. He looked at the girl, who was still trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. He wanted to reassure her, but he knew it was impossible to completely calm her in the middle of a war zone. The girl didn't respond at first. She just stared at him, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. Slowly, she nodded. John took a deep breath and scanned the room. They were safe for now, but he knew they couldn't stay here for long. The battle was still raging, and they needed to get to a secure location as soon as possible. "My name's John," he said, trying to break the tension. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking around the room. "Ava," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ava," John repeated softly, committing the name to memory. He gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll get you out of here okay." Ava nodded again, though she still seemed distant, as though she didn't fully understand what was happening. For a moment, they just stood there in silence, the sounds of the battle outside muffled by the thick walls of the building. John's mind raced as he tried to figure out their next move. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. They needed to find a way off the planet, but that would be easier said than done. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her tone a mixture of curiosity and confusion. John looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I just couldn't leave you there. You didn't deserve to die." Ava didn't respond, but she seemed to consider his words. There was a long silence before she spoke again. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, his heart heavy. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just stay close and we'll get out of here." For the first time since their escape, John allowed himself to relax for a moment. He had saved her, and now he would make sure she was safe. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but for now, that didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was alive, and he would protect her. Outside, the battle raged on, but inside that small, ruined building, for a brief moment, the world felt like it had stopped. The sounds of distant explosions and the constant whirring of military drones echoed faintly through the abandoned building. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of burnt metal. John's heart pounded as he listened for any signs of movement outside, but for now, everything was still. They had escaped, but how long could they remain hidden? John sat on the floor, his back against the cold concrete wall, taking deep, steadying breaths. Ava sat across from him, her legs pulled tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She still hadn't spoken much since they took refuge here, but John could tell she was shaken. She had been through a lot, more than he could imagine, and he felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. "Ava," John said, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, though there was an underlying urgency. "We need to move soon. The battle's not over. We can't stay here for long." Ava didn't look at him. Her gaze was distant, focused on the door as if waiting for it to burst open at any moment. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and John couldn't blame her. She had been through hell in the past few hours, and now they were stuck in a war zone with nowhere to go. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She finally looked up at him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "Why did you help me? You risked your life for me. You didn't even know who I was." John met her gaze, his expression softening. "I don't really know why I did it," he admitted. "But when I saw you, I knew I couldn't leave you behind. No one deserves to die like that, especially not a kid." Ava's eyes filled with uncertainty as she processed his words. "I'm not a kid," she said quietly, the edge in her voice surprising him. "I've had to grow up fast. I've seen things you wouldn't believe." John's heart ached at the bitterness in her voice. He could tell that she was no longer the same scared little girl he had pulled from the rubble. She had survived on her own for so long, and it showed. She was stronger, more independent than he ever could have imagined. "I know," he said softly, "but you still deserve a chance to be a kid. You don't deserve to carry the weight of all this." Ava didn't respond. She just stared at the ground, her fingers nervously tugging at a loose thread on her tattered clothes. John could see the pain in her eyes, and it made his chest tighten with guilt. He had promised to protect her, but the truth was, he didn't know how much longer he could keep that promise. The war was endless, and they were outnumbered. They had to get off this planet. They needed to find a way to escape before it was too late. John stood up, brushing the dust off his pants as he paced back and forth in the dimly lit room. "We can't stay here," he muttered to himself. "We need to find transport, anything that can get us off this rock." Ava watched him quietly, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for a way out. "Do you think we can get to the spaceport?" she asked. Her voice was more confident now, though there was still a flicker of uncertainty behind her words. "I don't know," John admitted. "It's a risk, but it's our best shot." He looked down at Ava, whose face was now set with determination. Despite her fear, despite everything she had been through, she still had the fire to fight. He couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. She was a survivor just like him. "We'll make it," he said, trying to reassure both her and himself. The two of them moved cautiously through the ruined building, making their way to the back door. John checked the alley outside before motioning for Ava to follow him. They moved quickly, their footsteps barely making a sound on the cracked concrete. The air was still thick with the acrid scent of smoke, and the occasional rumble of distant explosions reminded them that the war was far from over. They navigated the back streets of the colony, moving from shadow to shadow. John kept his rifle ready, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Ava kept close, her steps light and swift. She had become adept at moving quietly, blending into the ruins like she had lived there her entire life. It was clear that she had adapted to this world of war and chaos, but John wondered if it had hardened her more than she let on. They came to a small, hidden alleyway that led toward the spaceport. John knew it was risky, but it was their best shot. If they could get to one of the civilian ships, they could escape before the aliens locked down the entire area. As they rounded a corner, they froze. A group of alien soldiers was patrolling the area, their weapons raised as they moved in their direction. John's heart raced, and he immediately pulled Ava into the shadows, pressing her back against the cold, crumbling wall. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently. Ava nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't make a sound. They stood there motionless as the aliens passed by just a few feet away. John could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, his grip on his rifle tightening. If the aliens spotted them, there would be no escape. The soldiers moved on, oblivious to their presence. John let out a quiet breath, his body relaxing just slightly, though the tension in his chest remained. "Let's go," he whispered, leading Ava out of their hiding spot. They moved quickly now, their pace quickening as they neared the spaceport. The sight of the towering ships in the distance gave John a sense of hope. They were almost there, almost free. But he knew they couldn't relax yet. They had to stay focused. One wrong move and everything could go wrong. When they reached the edge of the spaceport, John stopped. He could see the alien patrols scattered throughout the area, their eyes scanning the horizon. There was no way to sneak past them without getting caught. "We'll have to make a run for it," John said, his voice low. "When I say go, we run straight for the nearest ship. Don't stop, don't look back." Ava nodded, her face grim but determined. She was ready. "Go," John said, his voice sharp. They ran, their footsteps pounding on the pavement as they sprinted toward the nearest ship. John could hear the sounds of alien gunfire in the distance, but he didn't dare look back. They had to keep going. They reached the ship just as the first alien patrol spotted them. John cursed under his breath as he shoved Ava up the boarding ramp. The hatch slammed shut behind them and the ship's engines roared to life. They were moving, escaping. For the first time in what felt like forever, John allowed himself a moment of relief. They had made it. But as the ship soared into the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Ava sat in a seat across from him, her face pale but relieved. She hadn't said a word since they boarded, but John could see the questions in her eyes. There were so many things left unsaid between them, so many things that needed to be explained. But for now, they were safe. For now, that was enough. The stars stretched out before them, endless and cold. And as they left the war-torn planet behind, John couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. The stars outside the ship flickered like distant flames, a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they had to go. Ava sat by the small viewport, staring out at the endless expanse of space. It was quiet now, the chaos of the war a distant memory, but the silence only seemed to amplify the weight of the unspoken words between her and John. Their journey to safety was far from over. John was in the cockpit, piloting the ship toward a nearby neutral planet, a place where they could regroup and figure out their next move. The ship hummed steadily, its engine a soft, comforting sound. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even in the safety of the stars. She didn't know how much longer they could hide from the war, from the past that both she and John had been trying to outrun. It had been days since they escaped the alien stronghold, and Ava still hadn't fully processed everything that had happened. She had been saved, yes, but the cost was high. The aliens were still out there, and the war was far from over. John had become her protector again, but Ava wasn't sure she could trust him fully. She had lived through too much to be that naive. Ava, John's voice broke through her thoughts. We'll be landing in a few hours. I know this might feel like a break, but we still have a lot to figure out. We need to talk. She turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway of the cockpit, looking at her with a mixture of concern and exhaustion. His face was tired, but there was a fire in his eyes, a determination that had never wavered. What do we need to talk about? Ava asked, her voice steady, but the bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. John stepped into the room, his boots making a soft thud as he walked toward her. I know you're angry, he said, sitting down next to her. I know I don't deserve your trust after everything that's happened, but I'm not the same person I was when I left you behind. Ava looked at him, studying his face as if searching for something. For an answer, for an explanation, maybe even for an apology. But she didn't get either. All she saw was a soldier just like the rest of them. Someone who had fought, who had survived, but never truly lived. You're right, she said quietly. You're not the same person, but neither am I. John opened his mouth as if to say something, but then he closed it. The words weren't enough, and he knew it. Ava had changed. She was no longer the scared, confused girl he had saved all those years ago. She had seen things, done things, and survived things that had transformed her. The war had a way of doing that. It made people hard, made them lose a piece of themselves along the way. We can't just ignore what happened, Ava continued, her eyes hardening. You saved me once, yes, but I wasn't the same person then either. You don't know what it's been like for me. All this time, I've had to survive on my own. I had to fight for everything I've got. And when I found out what the humans did to my people, I don't know if I can just forget that. John's heart sank as he heard her words. He knew she had been through a lot. The things she had seen, the pain she had experienced, he couldn't even begin to imagine it. He had been fighting his own battle, one that had made him forget who he was at times. But now, as he sat next to Ava, he realized that they both had their own scars. Scars that went far beyond the physical ones. Scars that could never be healed by words alone. I don't expect you to forget, he said softly, but I want you to know that I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. I'm here because I promised you, and I never break my promises. Ava met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something, but instead she stood up abruptly, moving toward the small galley at the back of the ship. I'm not interested in promises, she said coldly, her back to him. I've heard enough of those. John didn't respond. He understood her anger. She had every right to feel the way she did. He wasn't sure if he could ever make up for the years of separation, for the guilt he carried. But he was determined to try, for her, for them. The rest of the journey was quiet, filled only with the hum of the ship and the occasional warning beep from the control panel. Ava stayed in her corner, lost in her thoughts, while John focused on keeping the ship on course. Neither of them spoke much, but the tension in the air was palpable. They both knew that their past was a heavy burden, one that neither of them could escape. When the planet finally came into view, the momentary relief of safety didn't erase the tension that lingered between them. The neutral planet was a haven for refugees, a place where both humans and aliens could find temporary peace amidst the war. John had hoped it would be a good place for them to regroup, but Ava wasn't so sure. She had lived through enough betrayal to be cautious, especially when it came to places like this. The ship touched down in a small clearing, the engines whirring as they powered down. John stood up, stretching his sore muscles, while Ava remained seated, her face unreadable. We need to get our bearings, John said, glancing at her. There's a place not far from here where we can lay low for a while. I'll go first to make sure it's safe. Ava didn't respond. She simply stood up and moved toward the exit, grabbing her gear. Her movements were swift and deliberate, her face still a mask of indifference. John hesitated for a moment, watching her. He wanted to reach out to say something, but he wasn't sure what. He couldn't fix everything with a few words, and deep down, he knew that Ava needed time. She needed to figure out who she was now, just like he did. They stepped out of the ship and into the quiet alien landscape. The air was cool and the sky above them was a pale blue, streaked with wisps of clouds. The land was vast and empty, the perfect place to disappear if they needed to. John's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of danger. As they walked toward the small settlement, Ava spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You didn't have to come back for me," she said quietly. "I don't need saving. I never did." John turned to her, surprised by the bitterness in her words. "I never said you needed saving," he replied, his voice calm. "I came back because I wanted to, because you matter to me." Ava didn't look at him. "I'm not the same person you remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've done things that I'm not proud of." John stopped walking, standing still as he looked at her. "I don't care what you've done, I care about who you are now." For a moment, Ava said nothing. Then she looked at him, her eyes softening just slightly. "I'm not sure who I am anymore," she admitted. "I've spent so long fighting, so long trying to survive, that I don't know what it means to be anything else." John took a step closer, his voice steady. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but we'll figure it out together, whatever it takes." Ava didn't respond, but her expression softened just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, John felt a glimmer of hope. The planet was a temporary stop, a place to catch their breath before they moved forward. But for John and Ava, it was more than that. It was a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, and to understand who they were, together or apart. As they walked into the settlement, John knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still so many questions to answer, so many battles to fight. But at least, for the moment, they had a chance. And that was enough. The settlement on the neutral planet was quieter than Ava had expected. It wasn't a large city, just a small, makeshift refuge for those who had been displaced by the war. The buildings were simple, constructed from the same cold metal that lined the ships, and the streets were narrow, winding around the scattered structures like veins in a body. It felt like a temporary stop, a place for people to breathe before they moved on. Ava could hear the distant hum of machinery, but the streets themselves were eerily still. It wasn't the peace she had longed for. It was more like a pause, a breath taken before the storm continued. John led the way through the settlement, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if checking for threats, his posture always tense. Ava followed him quietly, still processing everything that had happened. She had hoped that when they arrived here, the weight of the world would lift off her shoulders. But it hadn't. She didn't know if that was even possible anymore. Every step she took reminded her of the weight of the past, the scars it had left, and the person she had become in the process. She had been alone for so long. Her life had been a series of battles, physical, mental, emotional. She had survived, but she didn't know how much of herself she had lost along the way. As they walked deeper into the settlement, John stopped in front of a small building. It was nondescript, nothing special, but there was a sense of calm about it. John knocked on the door, and after a few moments it creaked open. Inside stood a woman, her features weary but kind, with dark hair and a stern expression that softened when she saw John. "Ava, this is Renaa," John said, introducing them. "She's been helping people like us, refugees from both sides of the war." Renaa stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The inside was small but cozy, with dim lighting and sparse furniture. There was a table in the center of the room, a few chairs, and shelves filled with various supplies. Ava glanced around, noticing the makeshift nature of everything. This wasn't a permanent home, just a place to survive. "Are you okay?" Renaa asked, looking at Ava with genuine concern. Her voice was soft yet commanding, as though she had seen too much pain to offer anything but honesty. Ava didn't know how to respond. How could she explain that she was okay? That she hadn't been okay for a long time? She looked at John, hoping he would say something, but he remained silent, standing by the door, his hands in his pockets. "I'm fine," Ava said, her voice flat. "Just tired." Renaa nodded as if she understood more than Ava had said. "We all are," she said, "but you're safe here. Take a moment to breathe. You've made it this far, and that's something." John stepped forward then, his eyes still scanning the room. "We need to lay low for a while," he said. "The war's still raging and we're not out of danger yet." Renaa's expression darkened at his words, but she didn't argue. She walked over to a small cupboard, pulling out a bottle of water. "I'll set up a place for you two to rest," she said. "You look like you need it." Ava sat down at the table, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. She had always been able to push everything aside when she was fighting, when she was surviving. But now, in this moment of stillness, everything came rushing back. The pain of losing her family, the betrayal by her own people, the guilt of surviving when so many others hadn't. She had never let herself mourn before. She didn't have the luxury of doing so. But now, in the quiet of the room, with John and Renaa standing nearby, it all came crashing down. Ava's throat tightened, and for the first time since she had met John, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: grief. Real grief. The loss of everything she had known, the loss of the girl she had been before the war had taken over her life. The girl she had been before she had learned to survive at any cost. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, ashamed to show weakness. She was supposed to be strong. She was supposed to be the one who could take on the world and win. But in this moment, she didn't feel strong at all. She felt lost. Ava, John's voice cut through the silence. He had moved closer to her without her realizing. You don't have to do this alone. Ava looked up at him, her chest tight with emotion. I've always been alone, she whispered. I don't know how to be anything else. John knelt beside her, his expression softening. I get it. You've been through more than anyone should have to, but you don't have to keep carrying this weight alone. Ava shook her head, trying to push his words away. You don't understand. You didn't see what I saw. You didn't live through the hell I've been through. I don't need to understand everything, John said quietly. I just need to be here, and I'm not going anywhere. His words lingered in the air between them, and for a moment, Ava felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in so long: hope. It was fragile, like a delicate spark in the darkness, but it was there, and that scared her more than anything else. John stood up, giving her space. We'll figure this out one step at a time, but right now we need to rest. We can't keep running forever. Ava nodded, though she didn't feel as though she could rest, not yet, not while the memories still haunted her. As the hours passed, the quiet of the settlement pressed down on Ava. She lay in a small cot in the back room, staring up at the ceiling. She could hear John and Renaa talking in the other room, their voices low and hushed. They were making plans she didn't know if she could be a part of. But she couldn't lie to herself. She was tired, exhausted mentally and physically. She had survived, yes, but the cost had been too high. And now, here in this small, quiet place, she had a chance to rest, to think, to breathe. It wasn't much, but it was all she could ask for. John entered the room later that night, his figure silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. He moved silently, sitting down at the edge of Ava's cot. His presence was comforting in a way she couldn't explain. We leave tomorrow, he said, his voice low. Ava didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say. She was so used to being alone, to relying only on herself. But there was something about John, something in the way he cared for her, in the way he stood by her even after everything that had happened, that made her think maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. I'm scared, she said softly, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can keep going. John's hand brushed against hers, a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise. You don't have to be scared anymore, he said. You've already come this far. We'll make it through the rest of this together. Ava didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. For both of them. As she closed her eyes, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with John by her side, she was willing to face whatever came next. They would fight together. They would survive together. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to heal the wounds that had scarred them both. And for the first time in years, Ava allowed herself to sleep, the promise of tomorrow, of hope, lingering in her dreams.